Dr. Trowbridge, I guess it's a couple years now. And this is a man that I instantly liked. He was just one of these magnetic personalities that everyone wanted to come and speak to. But the reason why I liked John was because here was somebody who was actually crazier than I was. The man is crazy. In the best sense of the word. He is willing to go up there and fight with an enormous animal that we call conventional medicine. And now he's going to put on the gloves and fight for you representing biological dentistry. What a crazy guy. And this morning I was speaking to John and I said, well, what about the rest of the people in the audience? Are they going to be as crazy as you? And he said, I hope so. And we had an analogy of carrying a torch. And when you carry a torch, you carry a message, you carry influence, but you also carry a big fat target so that people can see you better and know where to aim their shots. So you need to be a little bit thick-skinned because what you're doing is different. I can't speak for dentists. I can certainly speak for doctors. I've been a practicing physician for over a quarter of a century. And I imagine most dentists are like most doctors. You show up in the morning, you've got a bunch of people to see. You don't want any distractions. You don't want anything interesting or challenging. You want to get through the day. So you practice cookbook medicine or cookbook dentistry. And whatever appears in, the standard journals is the standards of practice that you're going to do. Because you certainly don't want to open yourself up to litigation or questioning. This is the vast majority of medicine, and I imagine it's the vast majority of dentistry. So congratulations to all of you for being members or at least auditing this type of thing. So here's a hand to you. Here we go. We're going to be talking about a subject called glutathione. Glutathione and health and disease. And of course, towards the end of this talk, we're going to be focusing on glutathione specifically in dentistry. Now, glutathione. Glutathione might be a new word for most of you. Glutathione, just to deal with the biochemistry very, very quickly. I know that I hated biochemistry in university and in medical school, so I'm not going to torture you too much. Glutathione is abbreviated as GSH. Why the SH? Because the SH stands for sulfhydryl. It's a sulfhydryl. It has the sulfur appendage to it, and this is why we use the term thiol. And if you're going to be reading your literature and cracking open the books, and I don't think people crack books open as much as they crack open their laptops now, browsing the internet, you'll be hearing the term thiol. And when we talk about thiols, generally there's going to be some relationship to glutathione and sulfur-related amino acids. When we first started studying glutathione here at McGill University in Montreal, this is back 40 years now, there were literally a couple handful of good articles on glutathione. But as of this year, there's upwards of 85,000 articles on glutathione. These are not articles in Time magazine or in your local newspaper. These are articles that are published in peer-reviewed medical and scientific journals. So if glutathione is a new word to you or a new word to your patients, when I speak to the general public, I tell them that glutathione in a few years will be part and parcel of your everyday English language, the same way that most of your patients or clients, 30 years ago, if you would have asked them, what's an antioxidant? What is cholesterol? These are strange new words. Glutathione is at that point now, and everybody will be talking about glutathione in the next few years because of this huge wealth of information. So glutathione, again, it's a tripeptide. It's a small little protein made up of 3 amino acids. 2 of the amino acids, glycine and glutamate. If you even did something as crazy as eating at McDonald's this morning, you would have gotten sufficient glutamate and glycine in your diet. These are very, very easy to get even in our 2009 North American diet. The harder amino acid to get a hold of is the amino acid cysteine. This is a more and more difficult to obtain amino acid in our diet, and even more so, cysteine is not cysteine, is not cysteine. Cysteine comes in many forms, and it has to be in a form that is bioavailable to your body. And we're going to get into that just a little bit more. Cysteine is the limiting amino acid making up glutathione. So what does glutathione look like? Well, here you have your 3 amino acids with cysteine in the middle. And the cysteine has a very unique little side chain that we call a sulfhydryl group. And almost all of the biological activity of this tripeptide takes place in this little sulfhydryl group. That's where the money is, in this little molecule. Now I'm going to just give you a little bit of history. A lot of this history pertains to the researchers that are associated with Immunotech, the people in which this conference hall is housed. I refer to them because they really are the biggest names in glutathione. In the late 1960s, or early 1970s, I believe, there was this Dr. Gustavo Bunos, who immigrated from Italy to North America. And he landed in the States. He was a doctor already. And like so many of maybe our parents, some of you, some of our grandparents, come to North America to find your fame and fortune. So Gus Bunos came to North America to find his fame and fortune, landed in the United States. But because of the chauvinism of the American medical system, as a foreign medical graduate, he was not given a license to practice medicine. He got a little bit frustrated over there, made his way north up to Canada, where he heard things were a little bit more liberal, and sure enough, the Canadians turned him down as well. So Dr. Bunos figures, I'm a pretty smart guy. If I can't be practicing medicine, I'm going to do some research. And he found himself outside the gates of McGill University here in Montreal. Of course, for the Canadians here, you all know McGill University. For the Americans, to give you an analogy, McGill is kind of like the Harvard of Canada. So he's standing outside of McGill University, decides, I'm going to pursue a research career. And he has this crazy idea. Again, I use the word crazy for Gus, I use the word crazy for John, and crazy in the same way. This was his research idea. Now I'm taking you back to the 1970s, okay, when things were a lot tougher for this message in 2009 and 1970s, imagine. His idea was to come up with a natural protein that we were going to use in the hospital to give inpatients, post-surgery patients, trauma patients, to beef up their immune systems and to get them the hell out of the hospital as quickly as possible. Natural substance. These days, the pharmacy companies are snapping up vitamin pill companies as fast as they could find them. Back in the 1970s, this wasn't the case. And using natural substances in medicine was strange. Using them in a hospital was even strange. I do a lot of talks to the medical community I do a lot of traveling. And when I'm in the United States, and I speak to the American doctors, and I say, Dr. Bunos had this idea, we were going to use a natural product in the hospital, get people out of the hospitals as quickly as possible. And I see some of the American doctors scratching their heads. And some of them are brave enough to ask the question, you mean, Dr. Gutman, in Canada, you tried to get people out of the hospital? Because if you're in a privatized system, or somebody is well insured, having somebody in the hospital represents a good income. And very often, when I'm taken on a tour of American hospitals, the management will use terms like occupancy rate. Occupancy. Like in a hotel. And if the occupancy rate is high, it means that the hospital is doing well. Here in Canada, we have a different medical system. We have something called socialized medicine. And it's the government that ends up paying for the person's hospital stay, their visit, their drugs, their nursing care, et cetera, et cetera. And so when the Canadian government heard that this nut, Dr. Bunos, had this idea of getting people out of the hospital, well, all of a sudden, the government has big ears. And they started funding this research. Because not only would it cost them less to have people in the hospital, and you've never seen overcrowded hospitals still fit in this country. Not only could they get them out of the hospital, they could get them back in the workplace and pay more tax dollars. So there you go. And so Gus got himself a little bit of money, and he found some private investors as well. And he knew that, after all, if he was going to do a study to raise the immune system, it would be a protein that was going to have an effect on stimulating the immune system. So he started collecting all kinds of proteins. Animal proteins and plant proteins and soy and whey and algae, and you name it. Started putting them into the laboratory and feeding them to animals. Of course, we're going to be playing with animals before we're playing with humans. One day, this box shows up on his desk. And it's a delivery from Europe. And Dr. Bunos opens up the box, and inside the box is this fine white powder. And attached to the box is a note. It says, Dear Dr. Bunos, we understand that you're studying protein biochemistry. This is a protein byproduct of one of our industries in Europe. To this point in time, we've been tossing it in the river, tossing it in the farmer's fields. Can you find some practical application for this protein? So Bunos figures, okay, I'm using proteins. I'll playing with this white powder, figures it's from Europe, it's not from Colombia, so I might as well put it in my experiment. I get a much bigger laugh in Miami when I tell this. Lo and behold, 2 years later, there's a group of animals that are living. These animals are living between 30 and 50% longer. Wow. We still didn't understand why they were living longer. They were kind of living longer because they weren't dying off as fast. Does that make any sense at all? It's not that we were extending their lifespan, but we were making them more resistant to the things that normally would have killed them. Degenerative diseases sometimes. Cancer runs endemic in a lot of these inbred mice. Infectious disease. Animals are just doing better. And it took us yet another few years to realize what was happening was that the protein that we were feeding these animals was raising their glutathione levels. And by raising their glutathione levels, we were able to impart upon them an added resistance to these major killers. Now, this was mostly in a university setting. You can be sure that if this was inside of the house of a pharmacy company, that there would have been metal doors slamming shut and iron bars slamming down over the window. But in a university setting, fortunately, you spread your knowledge, and this went from Montreal to the University of Sherbrooke, University of Toronto, filtered into the United States, and here we are in 2009 with over 85,000 articles on glutathione. A lot of it because of these very bizarre, unusual, but exciting findings back in the 1980s. So raising glutathione, I guess the first thing you would think of is, well, why don't we eat glutathione? You cannot eat glutathione. Many, many articles out there that show that eating glutathione will not raise the glutathione levels in your body. Eating glutathione will raise amino acid content and other things in your toilet bowl, but not inside of your cell. It becomes rapidly catabolized. So an oral glutathione does not work. You're still going to see people hawking and vending oral glutathione and supplements, putting it into their vitamin pills. It's ridiculous. You cannot raise glutathione by eating glutathione. You can intravenously, and there's a number of very interesting studies using intravenous glutathione. Intravenous glutathione works, but has a very short half-life. It's effective, 2 hours, 6 hours, maybe, depending on the person's liver function and other parameters. Glutathione has been used as an aerosol, but I don't imagine that that's the kind of thing that's going to be applicable to your practice, but it's very interesting in pulmonary medicine. So again, how do you raise glutathione? How did Dr. Bunos raise glutathione? Well, you can use an oral strategy. And the oral strategy is to supply the organism, whether it's a mouse, whether it's a mosquito, or whether it's a human being, by supplying that living organism with the building blocks or precursors, because glutathione is made inside of the cell. So you need to supply the body, you need to supply the cells with the building blocks or precursors to make glutathione. There are drugs that do that. There are supplements that claim to do that. And we wouldn't be here if we didn't have glutathione precursors in our food. So let's look at these in turn. There are a bunch of drugs that will raise glutathione. Many of them are in still a research phase and are not that easily available commercially. One that is N-acetylcysteine. Who here has heard of N-acetylcysteine? Wow, that's good. So N-acetylcysteine is a very, very effective way of raising glutathione. But it does have some problems. When I use N-acetylcysteine, I use massive amounts. Because when I use it, it's usually in a life-threatening situation, and I need to have results instantly. And inevitably, when I use N-acetylcysteine, I will send my medical student to give it to the patient. Any idea why? Because inevitably, the patient will end up throwing up on my shoes. That's why we have medical students. Now, you can find N-acetylcysteine as a pharmacological agent. You can also find N-acetylcysteine in a natural health food store, although it's not natural, but it's available as a supplement. The other issues with N-acetylcysteine, not only when you have an effective dose, it generally has a pretty real spectrum of side effects, mostly the gastrointestinal nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, cramps. That's one issue. The other issue is that the half-life of N-acetylcysteine is relatively short. It's measured in hours. So to effectively raise glutathione levels, you need to be taking supplements 2, 3, 4, sometimes even 5 times a day. See, now when I'm raising N-acetylcysteine in an emergency department, I'll hang up a drip so I can deliver it over a 24-hour period, and that way glutathione levels are constantly high. They're not all over the map. See, with N-acetylcysteine, if you're going to take it once a day, for example, you're going to get this huge spike of glutathione, and then it will crash sometime before baseline. The other issue with N-acetylcysteine is that it is an excellent job for medicine. It does an excellent job in medicine. What does the medicine do? We have an acute intervention to take care of a broken vein. We fix things. So N-acetylcysteine is an excellent fix for certain overdoses. It's an excellent fix for fulminant hepatic failure. It's an excellent fix to detoxify some of the toxins that we purposely give to patients, like radiopaque dyes before intravenous pyelograms. So we don't burn out their kidneys, we give them N-acetylcysteine at the same time. But N-acetylcysteine on a chronic basis, let's say you're using it for more than several weeks, what happens is you end up with hypercystinemia, which is a pro-oxidant state. So the people that are taking N-acetylcysteine will feel pretty good, probably the first few weeks they take it, and then all of a sudden they feel washed up because it starts to work as a pro-oxidant, and you've defeated the whole purpose of the exercise. Great drug for acute intervention. Well, there are natural products out there. Some of them work, some of them don't. We already mentioned oral glutathione does not work. Don't waste your money. Don't suggest that anybody else waste your money. What about cysteine? I just said that the limiting factor for the manufacturing of glutathione in your cell is the amino acid cysteine. Why don't we just use cysteine? Well, cysteine, you can get cysteine as an isolated amino acid, a free amino acid called L-cysteine. But L-cysteine, again, orally is not a very effective way of raising glutathione. It becomes rapidly catabolized, oxidized, and again, it just doesn't work very well. It will work a little, but it can also make you feel sick as an isolated amino acid. And we've done these experiments way back when Bunos was doing his work looking at immune response. Again, we're looking at animal studies where we would use large proteins as glutathione precursors, or we would take other similar proteins, add cysteine to it, and it didn't work. So cysteine, nice try, doesn't work. Methionine. Methionine is an amino acid. You can take oral methionine. You will see methionine in some more expensive vitamin pill and sold alone as a supplement. What's a problem with taking methionine, especially too much of methionine? Good glutathione precursor. Why don't we use it a lot more? Methionine. Because methionine is also an excellent precursor for homocysteine. Y'all know homocysteine. Homocysteine has bubbled up from the 1960s, was ignored, finally drew our attention again at the turn of this century. Homocysteine is a high risk factor for the development of heart disease, for atherosclerosis. So we don't like homocysteine, which is why methionine is falling out of favor. Lipoic acid, another thing you'll find as a supplement or in vitamin pills. Lipoic acid is good, but again, too much of it, we have a pro-oxidant state. Milk thistle, I noticed on the list that some of you are NDs. So what do we use milk thistle for in herbal medicine? For detoxification. How does milk thistle work? Milk thistle is a weak glutathione precursor. That's how milk thistle works, as a liver cleanser. And of course, non-denatured whey protein. In whey protein, if you handle it properly, and it's a very, very delicate substance, there are specific proteins in whey, W-H-E-Y, that serve as glutathione precursors. If you know how to get them out of the whey, not out of the W-H-Y, the W-H-E-Y, to get it out of the whey, extract them from the whey. And this is what Dr. Bunos started fiddling around with 4 years ago, that now is known as a product called Immunicam. Well, obviously, we're getting some glutathione precursors from our food, or we wouldn't be here. Which foods do we have that give us glutathione precursors? Before I start explaining these foods, let me ask you a bit of a patronizing question, just to drive home a point. Do you think that the potato that your mom put in front of you when you were a kid, not you guys, you were between them, but as older guys who are missing hair or trying to turn gray, do you think the potato that your mom put in front of you is at all similar to the potato that you're going to buy at the farmer's market? Or any of the fruits and vegetables? Unless you guys have a lot of money and good sources of people who are doing organic farming, who happen to be on soils that are no longer depleted. This is why the medical professions, conservative animals, are even saying that now you need to supplement because you can't get what you need from your foods in 2009. Okay, so here are some foods that you can try. We can use vegetables, certain raw vegetables like broccoli. But key word here, the operative word is raw. Why raw? Because the glutathione precursors are extremely thermolabile. They're extremely sensitive to heat. If you cook them up, you destroy their ability to raise glutathione. Why do I have my broccoli in the back of the truck like that? Because that's how much you've got to eat these days to get a decent amount of glutathione precursor. You have to eat enough broccoli so that the level of pollution in your bedroom goes up so high at night that you've made your spouse sick. You might be healthy, but you're the only one in the room that's happy about it. Eggs. But the eggs have to be raw. Again, you heat them up, you break down the glutathione precursors. Who here is into raw eggs? I've got the wrong audience in front of me. Well, I'll tell you, here in Quebec, for example, the issue with raw eggs is that for the general public, about 35, maybe even 40% of raw eggs, if you culture them, are going to culture positive for salmonella and others for other organisms. And not everybody is into raw eggs. Personally, I don't even like cooked eggs, but raw eggs, there are some problems. Most of them are relate to its infectious disease possibility. So you have to be very, very careful. Meats. Raw meat. So if you're eating sushi 3 times a day, you're probably getting your glutathione precursors. You're probably going broke. And you may possibly be getting some very, very interesting parasites. Fascinating parasites. Raw meat. Okay, I'm weak. Here in Montreal, during the summer, we like to barbecue. Montreal summer, it's 3 weeks of absolute pleasure. And so I try to barbecue in the backyard, and I'll get myself a nice big thick steak. And I like the steak, when you cut it, it's still blue on the inside. Okay, so I'm getting my glutathione precursors. I'm also getting a healthy wallop of cholesterol elevating fats, carcinogens, both from the meat and the barbecue, good dose of steroids, antibiotics, pesticides, herbicides, and on and on and on. 3 weeks of summer, I'll survive. But not something you want to do every day. Raw meat has got its problems. Mother's milk. Very easy to get. Once in your life. Raw milk. Okay, now surprise me again. I ask you, who likes raw eggs? Who actually has access to raw milk? Damn, you people are strange. It's not even legal. Okay, but I guess in certain states it's legal, but you got to know the farmer, you got to have your own cow. You have to have a license to be able to sell it, because raw milk, as you know, it carries a strong likelihood of making you sick from an infectious disease if it's not handled properly. So the no, and I'll tell you, you'll see why. Because in the manufacture of cheese, again, there's going to be a certain heating process. They say, and I imagine some of them will have glutathione precursors, some of them. But if they've been pasteurized to any degree, very likely they don't. But again, these are hard things to get a hold of. Now, raw milk, I'm looking at the audience, and I know that not all of you could drink raw milk and not get sick. Because when you're drinking raw milk, again, there's a lot of people in this room. Just from your numbers, I know that a good percentage of you that are lactose intolerant. And some of you just will not be able to handle the fats. And some of us just don't need the fats. Okay, so raw milk, again, some problems for certain people. And of course, again, I am divulging that this is a bit of a conflict for me. I'm trying to give you a scientific lecture, but I am being paid as a consultant by Immunical. And the reason why I'm working with Immunical is that I am so enthused about the science that I've changed my entire practice. All I do is work on glutathione now, and I'm working with Immunitech because this really is the richest source of glutathione precursors available to you, short of you having a cow in your backyard. But even if you had a cow in your backyard, who's got a cow in your backyard? Watch, 15 people raise their hands. You would have to park yourself underneath the cow for 2 weeks to get the same amount of glutathione precursors that you would find in a couple boxes of Immunical. It takes 500 liters of milk to make a kilo. What is that translated 40 miles south of here? That's about 125 gallons to make a couple pounds. Okay, so let's get on to glutathione. Sometimes I will be speaking to immunologists, sometimes I'll be speaking to cell physiologists. Depending on the group, there are so many different things that we can talk about in regards to the rules of glutathione inside of the cell. And I believe that this is in your handout, and if I were to start covering this, one of two things would happen. I would either go way over time, or I would put you way into a coma. So let's narrow it down. The three most important functions of glutathione can be summarized by the word AID. A stands for antioxidants, I stands for the immune system, and D stands for detoxification. I just looked at my watch, we're 9:30, not bad. Okay, so we're going to look at glutathione aid for the immune system, right? Now, antioxidants. I'm talking to a group of people. I don't need to really get too far into antioxidants. Please forgive me, because this is my first exposure to you guys. I don't know everybody's background. So I took the liberty of going through some very basic things. For some of you, this will be very basic, but just for a handful of you that may not be up to speed on antioxidants, I wanted to make sure that we included everybody in this discussion. So antioxidants, now just like Dr. John Trowbridge, Dr. Linus Pauling was considered a radical, but in this term, radical refers to free radicals. And there's a whole new branch of medicine called free radical biology that you all know about, and you're going to be hearing some excellent lectures later on this weekend. Dr. Ali is going to be talking to you about oxidation and antioxidation, and there's all kinds of terms that we use, oxidation, antioxidation, oxidative stress, free radicals, and on, but they all have to do with oxidation and antioxidation. And in free radical biology, we've been able to look at 3, 4, maybe 500 different disease processes where antioxidants either play a role in prevention or occasionally treatment. So I read, I forgot who coined this. I read this and I thought it was really cute. Free radical production, an unfortunate consequence of life. Just very clever and very true. So if you're a living, breathing, eating organism, you're going to produce these free radicals. And the free radicals are highly toxic molecules. They have some use in our body, obviously, otherwise, whether you believe in creation, whether you believe in God, or whether you believe in Darwinism, usually if something is there, it serves a purpose. So there are purposes for free radicals. The problem is we tend to generate too many of them, and they are potentially extremely destructive. And these free radicals, what makes them particularly nasty is not only are they destructive in themselves, but whatever they touch turns into a free radical as well. So I was trying to explain this to my son and daughter, teenagers. I told them it's like a vampire. You let a vampire out in the community, not only is he or she hurting people, but turning them into more vampires. So here we have our little vampires. Looking at some healthy cells over here, and a free radical will drift over and attach itself to some structure in the cell, whether it's a cell membrane or a molecule or whatever else, and start to do its damage. And of course, it's turning other molecules into free radicals, so eventually you end up tearing, ripping through that cell, causing free radical damage, and you end up with a damaged cell. So this damaged cell, of course, is touching another damaged cell, and the process goes on and on and on and on. And eventually you end up with a group of cells with free radical damage. Some of your older folks out there, like me, look at the back of your head. You're going to be seeing some dark spots there. What people call liver spots have absolutely nothing to do with the liver, but everything to do with your tissues becoming oxidized. What is oxidation? Oxidation is an apple turning brown. Oxidation is a nail turning rusty. Oxidation is a tub of butter going rancid. Looking at the back of your hand, you're looking at tissues that are rancid, brown, and rusty. Now, do I really care that this black spot over here is on the back of your hand? No. Not that much in the back of your head. But the same process is taking place in your brain, in your lungs, in your heart, in your liver. That's what I care about. And this is why you all are promoting the use of antioxidants. Now let's look at the classic antioxidant, the one that's been described longer than any others, vitamin C. So here we have our vitamin C coming to the rescue. And the vitamin C, as you see, will track down these free radicals like a bunch of little Pac-Men and neutralize the free radical. Now you're going to be hearing much more about this process when Dr. Ali is talking, but let me just get some of this out of the way. Here you have your vitamin C molecule that has neutralized free radical. What's the problem here? The problem here is that, yeah, the free radical is neutralized, but so is the vitamin C molecule. The vitamin C molecule at this point in time cannot continue to do any work. Obviously, something has to be done. And what happens in many instances, that the vitamin C either is going to be peed out, or it's going to find a glutathione system, a molecule or a series of molecules, and it will take that free radical and hand it off to the glutathione molecule. And look what happens. The vitamin C is now liberated, recycled, and given a chance to continue its work. So it goes ahead and picks up another free radical, and this process continues and continues and continues, and the vitamin C becomes recharged and has a much longer lifespan. But it's not just vitamin C. Here is, I don't know, one of the top 3 important points that I'm going to be making this morning. None of the antioxidants, that you know of. None of the antioxidants you're going to find in your food, none of the antioxidants you're going to find at a pharmacy, at a health food store, none of them can work properly without the presence of glutathione. Now, granted, what I just showed you is vast oversimplification of what's going on. Sometimes these free radicals get handed off from one antioxidant to another, but ultimately, these antioxidants are recharged, recycled, and given any sort of a lifespan because of the presence of glutathione. Now it gets even cuter. Let's see what happens to glutathione. Remember I told you that when a free radical gets a hold of another molecule, it turns it into a free radical? Well, let's look what happens with glutathione. Here you have your glutathione, GSH, glutathione sulfhydride. It's an active molecule. And here you have the most toxic free radical known to man, what we call a hydroxy radical, a highly charged molecule that is going to do tremendous damage. Okay, now the glutathione, most antioxidants are called hydrogen donors. The glutathione is a particularly good hydrogen donor. So it donates this hydrogen to the free radical. And look what happens. Does that start to look familiar? You end up with OH, turns into OH2 or H2O. So you've taken the most toxic free radical and you've turned it into water. Wonderful, wonderful. What happens to the glutathione? Okay, so the glutathione, there you have two glutathione molecules. They both donate their hydrogen molecules, but do they become free radicals themselves? See, this is what glutathione is special. No. What they do is they drift towards each other, and you end up with a bond between the two sulfurs, and you end up with neutral glutathione, which we abbreviate as GSSG. So here's the whole picture. You end up with the glutathione molecules, the free radicals, neutralization of the free radicals, turning most of them into water. The glutathione does not become a free radical itself. It becomes a rather benign substance called GSSG, which if you get further into the biochemistry, can be recycled itself, or a lot of times we end up just losing glutathione in this manner. So glutathione, if you start reading about glutathione, whether it's in a real book, paper, or on a screen, you'll hear authors describe glutathione as the master antioxidant for that reason. So glutathione, the master antioxidant. Let's move on to I, the immune system. Now everybody knows why we have an immune system. Immune system, yes, even your patients are going to tell you we have an immune system to get rid of infectious disease. And here, that's the classical understanding of the immune system. But of course, you know the immune system is involved in so much more. Here's a picture of some bacteria. It's just a little bit of a quiz. I do this with my medical students on Monday mornings because they're usually been out partying all weekend, and I wake them up. You ask, how do you wake up your medical students? You give them a quiz. So I'm going to give you a quiz. Measured in weight, how much bacteria do you think you have in or on your body? 4 pounds. 4 pounds. Incredible. We are schlepping around 4 pounds of bacteria. Granted, most of this bacteria is what we call simply good bacteria. But how does your body know what's a good bacteria and a bad bacteria? It's the immune system. If you have a weakened immune system, you will fall prey to your own guts in a matter of hours per day. Here's some fungus we have growing on a little dish in the lab. Are you carrying fungus? Is there fungus among us? My wife was giving me hell the other day because I had some dandruff on my collar. It's an example of fungus among us. And then I started making fun of her brother-in-law who had this brown, ratty-looking tongue. chronic subungual toenail infection. It's a fungus. Again, do I care about the dandruff or my brother-in-law's ratty toenail? Weak immune system. Someone with AIDS, for example, that can kill an AIDS patient. In fact, a large amount of AIDS patients die from overwhelming fungal systemic infection. Again, importance of the immune system to keep these otherwise trivial organisms at bay. Viruses. I'm going to talk to you about viruses. And everywhere you walk now, you've got your hand cleaner, and you've got to learn how to sneeze into your elbow. I don't know how that works. Parasites. Now there's a big debate how much parasites are part of our life. But tonight, when you check into your hotel and you put your head down on a pillow and you lie down on a nice posturepedic mattress, you'll be crushing hundreds and thousands of these. Now, my background is in emergency medicine. I see some very, very distraught people who haven't been taking care of themselves, who are malnourished, and these little critters can be a real nuisance if you've got a compromised immune system, and it's a mess. And I get my medical students to clean them up. Okay. Here's a great slide. I love this slide. Here we have a tumor cell, and right next to it, this big gray mass over there, is a white blood cell, in this case a T lymphocyte. And this white blood cell, frontline soldiers of our immune system, are going to track down this tumor cell and destroy it. Okay, this is the last quiz I'm going to give you today. And this is new to me. I only found this out about a year and a half ago. And again, I give credit to McGill University in Montreal. I got to push McGill. How many of these tumor cells do you think you have in your body right now? Who said that? 1 million. Good for you. 1 million. Why is it that we're not going to be in the doctor's office in 3 weeks from now? Because the immune system is constantly alerted to abnormal cells, whether it's a bacteria, a virus, or a tumor cell. And again, I go back to the wonderful example of immunocompromise, that being AIDS. AIDS patients are much more prone to the development of cancer. They get the strangest cancers. For example, Kaposi sarcoma. When I was in medical school, pre-AIDS days, the only time we ever saw Kaposi sarcoma was in a textbook. Now, if I go to a hospital and I see Kaposi sarcoma, come on in. 99.9% of the time, it's going to be an AIDS patient. So immune system, a weakened immune system, come on in. Makes you much more prone to the development of cancer. And you've got 1 million of these guys swimming around in your body right now. Thank God we have an immune system. Okay, so I'm going to give you a short course on immunology. Again, please, I don't mean to be patronizing anybody, but in case of, I don't know all of your backgrounds, let's go through this. Okay? And our case subject today is me. I would have used somebody else, but I didn't have John's slide. I would have loved to use John. But anyways, I'll pretend that I'm somebody like John, who's extremely friendly, affable, and is now your president. So at the end of the morning or the end of the conference, John is going to be vigorously shaking your hands, and depending on the individual, if he likes you, well, who knows? And especially in Montreal, you know, we don't just kiss once, we kiss twice. You greet somebody in Montreal? Yeah, so we're going to have twice the levels of swine flu than anybody else. But somebody's going to leave a nice glob of viral secretions on the end of John's finger. It's going to happen. And somebody else is going to ask John or myself, well, let's use John, I'm going to pick on John, a difficult question. And John's going to think about the answer, and he's going to rub his eye. And all of a sudden, this viral particle has the opportunity to enter into John's bloodstream. And you see very quickly that it will be surrounded by white blood cells, our frontline soldiers of the immune system. And what these white blood cells will do is actually ingest the virus or the bacteria or whatever the infectious agent is, and gobble it up, literally gobble it up and break it down. Well, viral particle, in 20 minutes, John might be overwhelmed with millions of viral particles. But John only has so many white blood cells. There's a certain number of white blood cells. You know, when I do my yearly exam, I do a blood test and I measure your white blood cell. How can these white blood cells deal with the millions upon millions of viral particles? Well, the white blood cells themselves start to clone. We call monoclonal expansion, make copies of themselves over and over and over again. And in an ideal situation, if you've got a good immune system, this can go on for about 500 replications. Here's the important point when it comes to glutathione. The limiting factor to both many of the functions and certainly the replication of these white blood cells is their availability of glutathione. If you start running low on glutathione, your ability to fight off infectious disease becomes low. And we've looked at this for so many years. I keep on coming back to AIDS because it's such a perfect model of immunocompromise. We've known for almost 20 years that AIDS patients, by definition, are going to be glutathione deficient. And not only glutathione deficient total body, but glutathione deficient in the specific white blood cells that are affected in AIDS, something called a CD4 lymphocyte. So what do you do with this information? Doesn't take a rocket scientist or a doctor. Try to replenish glutathione levels in AIDS patients. And the first studies just looked at glutathione levels, and they've been able to correlate that the AIDS patients with the lowest glutathione levels were the first ones to die. The AIDS patients with the highest glutathione levels were going to live the longest. So you intervene to try to raise glutathione levels, and we did that here at McGill. Some of our studies, going back, 15 years now, were funded by the Canadian government through what's called the Canadian HIV Trials Network. We started replenishing AIDS patients using the Immunocal product and measuring things like CD4 lymphocyte count, viral load, with just phenomenal results. And if we have time at the end of the morning, we'll see. There's so much we can talk about. Maybe I'll show you some of the results of those AIDS research experiments. But you're going to be seeing this more and more. It's the application of raising glutathione in HIV. So think of glutathione I literally as food for the immune system. So A, glutathione, the master antioxidant. I, glutathione, food for the immune system. Let's move on to D, which is the theme of this weekend here for you, detoxification. So we cannot emphasize detoxification strongly enough to the community. Now, when I speak to medical doctors, the ones that first recognize the word glutathione is still a bit of a strange word in the medical profession too, so far. They go, oh yeah, glutathione, that's what we use for acetaminophen overdose. Y'all know acetaminophen, Tylenol, Adasol, a bunch of different names. Taking a Tylenol overdose is actually an extremely ugly way to die. What happens about 2 to 5 days later, essentially your liver falls apart. It's just awful. It's just awful. And Tylenol overdose is a very effective way of killing yourself. I don't know. Some of you look depressed. Maybe I shouldn't tell you that. But I'm not worried. You're all Americans. Americans are much more interested in instant gratification. So guns seem to be more popular or hanging. But in Europe, I think the most common way to kill yourself with an overdose is with acetaminophen. All you need is a big old bottle of extra strength Tylenol. That's all you need. But why do you think they make the Tylenol in these cute little bottles for kids? the kids are cute. No, you make them because you can't get enough Tylenol in the little bottles for a kid to, sneak a bunch and kill himself. Say himself. It's usually little boys that do that. So when you take the Tylenol overdose, you start to have this cascade of oxidation in your liver through what's called MFO, mixed function oxidase. How do I save somebody's life when they come in? If I can get my hands on a patient within the first 24 or 48 hours, I can save their life. And the way I save their life is by injecting them with a drug that raises glutathione. See, what I do is, it's probably too small to see from there, but normally when you take an overdose, you get shuttled down this oxidation pathway and you end up with hepatotoxic, liver toxic metabolites. And when you put in glutathione, you open up the normal pathway and it ends up being excreted. So I save people's lives, emergency doctors save people's lives by raising glutathione. But what these doctors don't know, and John's been around doctors way too long and attest to this, is that look at the list of substances that are detoxified by glutathione. Now, if this screen went down to the floor, I could fill it with more stuff. If the screen went down into the basement, I can fill the entire screen with substances that are detoxified by glutathione. Automobile exhaust and cigarette smoke. And I talked to you about the 3 weeks of barbecuing in the backyard in Canada. If you guys are from Texas, you're eating a lot more carcinogens than I am. The Frankfurter that you're going to get at the ballpark is loaded with nitrosamines, carcinogens. I don't know where you live in the United States. I don't care if you're in a farming community or you're in the middle of the city. This crap is going to make its way to the middle of the Pacific Ocean, up over the Antarctic or the Arctic. I mean, it's everywhere. Every time you clean your house, you have somebody clean your house or wash your walls. Every time you turn on your shower, there's stuff leaching out of the paint and the walls, of broadloom on the floor, pesticides and herbicides, fish. Always let out fish up there. Of course. All of these substances are detoxified by glutathione. And by no coincidence, the highest levels of glutathione to be found in the body is in the liver, which is, after all, the major organ of detoxification. So I tell people, when you think of the A, master antioxidant A, fuel for the immune system I, and D, next to water, the most important detoxification enzyme or system that we have in our body. And I'm sure later on this weekend, you guys will be looking at this even in more depth. But the problem is that we're always losing glutathione. All of us are losing glutathione. I'm looking at some of you, you're older, some of you are sniffling, some of you are bald, some of you are overweight. I'm not making fun of you, I'm looking at you and I'm determining your glutathione levels. The study shown that things like drugs, if you're taking Tylenol, you're depleting glutathione. Tylenol, wow, what a safe drug, eh? You're going to be seeing in the next couple of years warnings on Tylenol bottles or Adderall bottles. I don't want to pick on one particular company because I don't feel like going to jail. Not to be taken by alcoholics or people with liver disease, and not be taken with serious infections, not to be taken by AIDS patients, and on and on. It's not really, I mean, I use Tylenol. It's useful, but like any other drug, it's a double-edged sword, and it needs to be handled with care. But there are many drugs that deplete glutathione. Poor diet. Everybody here eat well? I don't care, even if you say you eat well, what you're saying is you're trying to eat well. It's very, very hard in 2009 to eat well, because you just can't get what you need. Injury, trauma, burns deplete glutathione. Stress. Damn, my glutathione levels must be low. That's a joke, you can laugh. There was a great little study where they took people who practiced TM, transcendental meditation, and they measured their glutathione levels. And they had higher glutathione levels. because they've been able to lower the stress level. And there's a whole cascade of biochemical and hormonal events that take place with stress. Stress will lower glutathione. Infection, we've talked about infection, pollution, the aging process itself. You lose 10% of glutathione every decade, which opens up the doors to diseases of aging. What are diseases of aging? Name them. Alzheimer's? Okay. Diseases of aging. Parkinson's. Senility, arthritis, cardiovascular disease, goes up with age. Cancer, for example, prostate cancer is essentially a cancer of the aging process, and on and on and on. Radiation. When you go out in the sun, how does radiation do its damage? By liberating free radicals. So there's so many things that will lower your glutathione levels. Your glutathione levels go down, oxidative stress goes up, free radical damage goes up. Remember, it's detoxification potential, so the toxins build up. This further depletes glutathione, and you end up with a weak cell, a sick cell, an old cell, and worst case scenario, a dead cell. And so we have to do everything we can to sustain our glutathione levels. Let's look at some of the clinical applications. First, I'm going to do a brief overview, and then we're going to get into some specifics. Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, again, diseases of aging. Some of the most spectacular results that you will see is raising glutathione levels in Parkinson's patients. There's some, even if you go online, it's wonderful, wonderful videos. There's one American practitioner by the name of Perlmutter. He's big into, he's a neurologist, big into Parkinson's, and what he's using is intravenous glutathione. And you should see the videos of these people. They're kind of stumbling down the hallway like this, and a half hour after glutathione intravenous bolus, they're going up, shaking hands, doing spins, and the problem with intravenous glutathione is the half-length is rather short. But we've done work. I'm hopefully going to be starting a new project using the Immunical at McGill. We're still working on some details in studying Parkinson's disease. When you take out part of the brain in Parkinson's on autopsy, an area of the brain called the substantia nigra, and you send it to the laboratory, you will find two things all the time. Number one, extremely high levels of oxidative damage. And number two, extremely low levels of glutathione, sometimes 2%, 4%. Whether this is the chicken or the egg, I don't know. But I do know that by raising glutathione levels, if these tissues are still viable, you can see dramatic improvement. Alzheimer's, for reasons I don't understand, the effect isn't as dramatic, as profound. But when we're looking at Alzheimer's, I mean, how much do we have in conventional medicine that we can consider a cure? I don't know, maybe antibiotics might be able to cure an infection. Most of the time, what we're trying to do is relieve symptoms, or even better, improve quality of life. And so really, we're looking at raising glutathione levels in Alzheimer's patients. That's the intent, to slow down the process, to give them some extra months or years to be able to communicate with their family and on and on. Cataract formation. When I first started working on modalities to raise glutathione, the Immunical came up, and I started getting phone calls. Dr. Gutman, and of course, I get all kinds of phone calls. Dr. Gutman, I'm taking the Immunical to raise my glutathione levels, and I can see better. You know, you hear it's going to be a strong placebo effect anything time you put anything out there. And I started getting more phone calls, and the story was the same. And I started looking at the individuals calling me. They were all usually between 40 to 60 years old, and I wanted to explain why I was getting these phone calls. started looking at the literature. And in fact, the first medical specialty that started to really understand the clinical potential of raising glutathione were the ophthalmologists. Because the lens of the eye, it's not a lens like this. It's not a hard plasticky substance. It's actually a little bag of protein, of liquid protein. And these proteins are extremely sensitive to oxidative stress, especially from ultraviolet light that you can see from sunlight. And so these proteins become oxidized. And that's how you start to develop cataract. And these people were at the very, very early age of cataract formation. You see, cataracts don't bother you until you're 70 or 80 when they're dense enough. But they start forming years before. These people were having earlier reversal of their cataract. So we could talk about all kinds of diseases of aging, and again, forget about what I say. I mean, who's Dr. Gutman anyways? When doctors pick up my book and they read it, researchers pick up my book, they read it, they don't bother reading what I write. They got it. What they do is they turn to the back of the chapter to look at the references. Okay, so that's what I want you to do. If you get a hold of my book, go to the references, look at the original research material. Cardiovascular disease. We might have a chance to talk about that. You know, heart disease and stroke are still the number one killers of North Americans. High cholesterol. Glutathione is important in reperfusion injury. We could look at infectious disease. We've done studies in AIDS and pretty much any infectious organism. You can go online to PubMed and you can find articles on raising glutathione. Glutathione is a generalized way that the immune system responds. When I say generalized, although I give the pharmaceutical companies a lot of credit for the development of new and more powerful antibiotics, I consider these antibiotics offensive weapons. And you've got an enemy, and you've got your offensive weapon in the form of an antibiotic. What's a problem with these developing a new antibiotic? Every time you develop a new antibiotic, you develop another dozen or 2 dozen antibiotic-resistant organisms. So these offensive weapons are limited. Here in Montreal, we're in Montreal, so I've got to talk about hockey, but I can talk about football just as easily. Any coach will tell you to win a game, yeah, it's nice to score goals. Defense wins a game. And more research is concentrated now on defense. What is our defense? Our defense is the immune system. So when we're talking about raising glutathione, it's not like the development of an offensive weapon that has a specific target. What it does is bolsters your defense, it bolsters your immune system. So it's really quite independent of what the attacking organism is. We have a generalized, heightened immune awareness against all comers. We've done some beautiful stuff in pulmonary disease, especially in kids. Kids seem to respond to this very favorably, probably because they got young, viable tissues. Raising glutathione in kids, especially cystic fibrosis and asthma, very, very good results, published results, statistically relevant results. I'm going to take a chance here. Please don't beat me up about this. There are a lot of natural products out there. I come from conventional medicine. Professor at McGill University, blah, 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 blah. So I know what the thinking is, and I still have some residual thinking from conventional medicine. And that is the natural product. Don't think that because something is natural means that it's safe, means that it's good for you. Cocaine is natural. Arsenic is natural. I don't suggest that my patients take them. There are a few I'd like to recommend. So when you look at natural products, you need to look at them with a scientific, cynical eye. And really the bottom line for any product, whether it's a pharmaceutical or whether it's a natural product, is what does the research show? I mean, is there really evidence over here?
And there's some natural products out there that are just absolutely marvelous. And finally, they're starting to get the attention of the government, the Canadian government, the American government to set up a whole new project looking at CAM, complementary and alternative medicine, funding research into vitamins and supplements. Long overdue, but finally here. So you need to pay attention to the research. Okay, now I'll get off my political soapbox here and continue. We can talk about many digestive diseases. We can talk about inflammatory bowel disease, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease. All of these are glutathione deficiency diseases. And the thing that keeps me very, very busy and always occupied is that the articles on glutathione as it relates to clinical disease is increasing just massively. I'm supposed to be the expert. I would never call myself the expert because it's impossible to be expert because this is such a moving target. If I read 36 hours a day, then maybe I'd be an expert. This is an enormous amount of information. But what we're going to try to do for you is get you some of the information on clinical applications of raising glutathione. And we're going to take a short break. Oh, yes. Okay, 5 minutes of questions, but I will hang around at the end. Yes, sir.
On your list, you had macular degeneration.
Yes.
How does it work?
Again, in macular degeneration, you'll notice that ophthalmologists generally, if you go to visit an ophthalmologist with macular degeneration, many of these patients will end up walking out of the office looking like a total dork because they've got these sunglasses that are wrapped around their entire head. And because what we're trying to do is in many cases, there's different kinds of macular degeneration, but most of them are very adversely affected by ultraviolet radiation. And the breakdown of the tissues of macular degeneration is secondary to oxidative stress. And there's a lot of companies out there promoting the use of antioxidants with some success in retarding the progression of macular degeneration. But of course, the major antioxidant in these cells, in the retinal cells, is glutathione. Wow, reverse it. Obviously not all the time, because sometimes these cells are just too far gone to reverse it. The vast majority of the time, what you're doing is slowing down the process. Ideally, if it's especially early on, you can, and there are articles showing some of it. But again, we don't always fix things. And it's a quality of life. I don't know what to say something. John has mentioned chelation as an approach to the improvement of macular degeneration. And I'm going to jump all over it because I give lectures to all kinds of groups. And I've been invited a couple times to speak to chelation therapists. Last time I think I spoke in Florida to chelation therapists. And my message to them was raising glutathione was an oral chelation strategy. I got a lot of attention. Everybody was really, really interested. They wanted to know about glutathione, and they found what I had to say fascinating. Never invited back. Why? John, chelation therapy, $400 or $500 a pop, start on intravenous. And here I am promoting oral chelation therapy for a couple dollars a day. Bit of a conflict of interest for their business. So very, very interesting. No, thank you. I'm not going to shoot myself in the leg. Yes, sir. This is an interesting question. Like intravenous glutathione, it actually does not get absorbed directly into the cell. It's too large a molecule. And what happens is that when you inject glutathione into the bloodstream directly, it will start breaking down into its constituent amino acids, and you hope that the cells see enough cysteine so that actually the cysteine can be transported across the cell membrane, and then it has to be remade into glutathione. And it's not a very effective way. It does work, and again, the half-life is very, very short. So you see most of the approaches in research, if they want to raise glutathione intravenously, rather than using intravenous glutathione, most of these guys are using intravenous N-acetylcysteine. Yes, sir? I don't want to appear cocky or chauvinistic, but I really stick to my guns when I talk about clinical research. Liposomal glutathione, it's an interesting strategy, it's clever. I haven't seen any convincing research in well-controlled, double-blinded clinical trials to show that it has any effect on a clinical pathology. When it does, then I'll talk about it. Yes, sir? Diabetes. Wonderful approach. Will it affect sugar levels? Probably not. But why am I so enthusiastic about recommending raising glutathione in a diabetic person? Well, we have to ask ourselves the question. What are the two things that usually get a diabetic to go to the hospital, to their doctor, or go to the grave? Really, the two most important pathologies in diabetes, number one, let me start with number two. The second one is infectious disease. Diabetics, by definition, are immunocompromised. Toe infections, skin infections, bladder infections, sepsis. And when you can bolster the immune defense in a diabetic, you can cut down on the amount of infectious complications. But the major killer and cause of morbidity and mortality in diabetes is circulation. Macrocirculation and microcirculation. Macrocirculation, diabetics have a much higher incidence of heart attack, have a much higher incidence of stroke. When you look at the microcirculation, this is what really is problematic. The circulation to the eye becomes affected. You have diabetic blindness. To the kidney, you get renal failure. To the nerves, you get peripheral neuropathies. So really, it's the circulation in the diabetic that's a problem. How does glutathione relate to circulation? Now I'm going to talk about diabetics, smokers, people with heart disease, high blood pressure, anybody with a circulatory problem. Pretty much everybody here, the way we eat. In our bloodstream, we have circulating fats. These fats are very important. They help us build steroids, but these fats can be problematic when too high. The most notorious of these fats would be cholesterol. And John's going to be talking about that. When the fats get too high, like cholesterol, and they become oxidized, oxidation, lipid peroxidation, changes these fats biochemically. So in essence, they become stickier. Simplification. And they start gumming up your arteries, and you end up with the deposition of plaque. Why are diabetics more prone to circulatory disease? As John will explain, the diabetic environment has much higher oxidative stress, which is why doctors will put diabetics on cholesterol-lowering statins at numbers much earlier than other people. Because they don't know this, but it's because they have higher oxidative stress. So when you oxidize cholesterol, when you oxidize fats, become stickier, you get cardiovascular disease. There is a substance that we produce ourselves that circulates in the blood that prevents the oxidation of fat. And that substance is called glutathione peroxidase. If you raise glutathione, you raise glutathione peroxidase. So what we're doing by raising glutathione in the diabetic is no instant gratification. It's not going to affect the sugar. What it's going to do is prevent them, protect them from the long-term consequences of the disease. True preventive medicine.